Hello, class. Thank you for stopping by for this week's presentation. My name is Duelo Ortiz, and in this week's summary, we're going to talk about performance measurement. So this is the presentation outline, and these are the topics that we'll be covering. We have behaviors in measurement, approaches to measuring performance, gathering information, implementation, biblical integration, and we have the 2 questions for the week on the last slide. So behaviors in measurement. We know that performance is about behaviors, and behaviors ultimately drive performance. And in order to evaluate measurement approaches, we must first understand the behaviors that kind of drive performance and look at the several factors in implementing a more effective performance management system. So some of those factors include task performance. Those are role prescribed and specific to activities within the job. You have contextual performance, which are not necessarily role prescribed, but they provide a good environment. The way the text puts it is that it's being a good citizen. It's more, a lot of that encompasses the soft skills, where the task performance is more the technical. The determinants of performance, you have declarative knowledge, which is information about facts, information, and principles. Procedural knowledge, which is a combination of knowing what to do and how to do it. And then you have motivation, which is the choice to expend the effort, level of effort, and choice to persist. Now, some of the approaches to measuring performance, there's 3 of them. You have the behavior, results, and trait approaches. A behavior approach emphasizes what employees do, how work is done, and it's most appropriate when the link between behaviors and results is not necessarily obvious. Outcomes occur in the distant future, and or poor results are due to causes beyond the employee's control. So these conditions may not always be involved in all organizations, but they should be reviewed and potentially included as part of performance. Another approach is the results approach. So the focus is on the end result, and the ends justify the means. And the results orientation, it's a very positive ideal, since it provides employees with more autonomy. It encourages creativity and innovation, and in most cases, results are easier to define than the behaviors associated with yielding these outputs. So results, for example, a good example of results would be salespeople. And within the traits, this is the emphasis on individual and less on the situational factors, behaviors, and results. So approaches to measurement. We know results approach to measurement include accountabilities. So those are the expected areas of focus and objectives, specific target or aims. We have objectives, which are specific to the roles within the organization. They should be clear, specific, challenging, agreed upon, significant, prioritized, and bound by time. You have performance standards, and they should be measurable, practical, realistic, and achievable. And really, the performance standard plays as the kind of the yardstick that encompasses all those performance measures. You have behavior approach to measuring performance, and these are going to be your competencies, which determine how results can be achieved successfully, have a lot to do with your job proficiency. Indicators, and that's the assessment to observe the competency that's being employed. And then you have the measurement system selection. So you have 2 different systems, and one of them is the comparative one, which is the employee comparison, include rank order, there's distribution in terms of comparing performance, and then the percentile. And those you have to be a little bit careful, because there could be this perception of bias depending on how you make those comparisons among employees. There's also the absolute system, which is the evaluation is based on individual performance without any reference to comparison to your peers. So gathering information, we have the appraisal form. So we know that's a popular way to measure performance and capture basic employee information, accountabilities, needs, plans and goals, comments, etc. They should be simple, relevant, impartial, aligned with company's mission, vision, and values. And you remember through the text, there's various different forms as it relates to appraisals, and there's not really a best form, but it should encompass a lot of these not just the basic information, but they definitely should be simple, relevant, understandable, and aligned with some of those values, mission, and vision within the company. The assessments, they need to be facilitated either in periods of 6 months, if not quarterly. And of course, obviously feedback will play a big role in that appraisal process as you're gathering information. And as we talk about feedback, supervisors are going to play the most direct and critical role. And then you have peers and subordinates that can certainly work as an advantage or disadvantage to performance. Collective feedback will help reduce the possibility for bias by any one individual. And then you also have survey questionnaires. So this is another tool that can be used for feedback and ultimately for within the process of the appraisal. Implementation. So you have requirements for successful implementation. Part of that system should be tested for errors, glitches, so they can be removed. You have monitor system for benefit and advantages or disadvantages. And with the system monitoring, one of the things that was talked about was piloting those systems. And that's a great way to be able to reduce some of those errors and really monitor the system as you continue to make sure it is a successful implementation. There's also the appeals process. And obviously this will increase employee acceptance and satisfaction. And if it can be appealed, and obviously HR will play a big part of that. You have the training program for raters in order to reduce errors. And there's also a communication plan, which will also increase employee acceptance and satisfaction. And the idea behind communication plan is that you should kind of ask these questions as you're going through and measuring your performance and measuring specifically the communication. And these are just some questions, obviously not exhaustive, but you have, what is performance management? How does performance management fit into our strategy? What's in it for me? How does it work? And what are my responsibilities? And this is just a Bible verse that I kind of was thinking about that it would integrate well with kind of the theory and practical application of the performance management. This one came from Habakkuk 2:2. Then the Lord answered me and said, write the vision and make it plain on tablets so that a herald may run with it. This is the reference for the content in this presentation. And these are the questions for this week's discussion. So the first question is, some performance measures are naturally built into many jobs. For example, it's easy to measure salespeople since you can simply measure sales, and skilled tradesmen can be evaluated by their work quality and time to produce the results. But what about those jobs that are not easy to measure, such as managers throughout an organization? How do we define performance measures for them since their work is not always evident or easy to measure? And the second question is, God's performance checklist seems to be more focused on contextual performance rather than the task-oriented ones. So use an example from Scripture to support this, and how can organizations incorporate into their performance management system? Thank you so much, and look forward to this discussion.